Always. We ask the question, what is needed in the world?
Bivši portugalski premijer, danas UN-ov visoki komesar za pitanja izbjeglica Antonio Guterres Al Jazeeri otkriva detalje u vezi s planom zatvaranja poglavlja neriješenih izbjegličkih pitanja na Balkanu. Prije angažmana u UNHCR-u u visokoj politici proveo više od 20 godina. Od ovog je čovjeka potekla ideja regionalnog programa zbrinjavanja izbjeglica i raseljenih s područja Balkana, za koji je zatraženo više od 500 milijuna eura međunarodne pomoći.
In talk to Al Jazeera, UN High Commissioner for Refugees Antonio Guterres. Mr. High Commissioner, welcome to Al Jazeera.
Pleasure to be here with you.
The war in the former Yugoslavia ended almost 17 years ago, and some people say that the regional housing program and the donor conference in Sarajevo are two initiatives arriving too late. Well, your organization played a very important humanitarian role in the Balkan region during and after the conflict. And vis-à-vis that role, how do you respond to that question? Why is this happening only now? Why not before?
Well, many things have happened before. 2,700,000 people were displaced during the war, and more than 1 million found a solution, and we were very strongly engaged with the government and other entities in making sure that that could happen. We had voluntary repatriation, we had local integration, we had many solutions for many people. But there is always in this crisis a last group. And this last group is of vulnerable people with complex rights to be defined, and sometimes no agreement between governments on what are the rights that should be attributed to them, with high levels of vulnerability, many of them in collective centers in really very bad conditions. And to now write the last chapter of this book of displacement that, as you said, took so many years, it was necessary to build trust, to build confidence, because now essentially it's a political solution that the governments finally were able to come together and find. And this takes time. Our experience in world affairs is that humanitarian solutions are relatively easy to find, but they don't really solve the problem. To solve the problem, you need a political solution, and for a political solution, you need political will and trust and confidence. And as you know, after a war that was so devastating, like the war in the Balkans, it was necessary to have some time for finally the four governments coming together and finding an agreement, a pragmatic agreement, on how to address the situation of this last group of people, very vulnerable people. We are talking about 74,000 persons in very difficult circumstances. Of course, this is not the totality of the problems of the area, but it is a very important initiative, and we are very happy that it was possible to bring everybody together, and with this regional housing program to really have a pillared in a comprehensive, durable solutions approach to the plight of the refugees and internally displaced in the region.
Well, how many people are to benefit from regional housing program? Who are they? Where are they?
74,000 people. As I said, vulnerable people, people that many of them are elderly, many of them live in very destitute conditions, 45,000 in Serbia, and then 14,000 in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 8,000 in Croatia, and 6,000 in Montenegro and 8,500 in Croatia. And of course, they were selected with a common approach by the four governments with very clear criteria of vulnerability that were established by UNHCR, and then of course with a cooperative effort of the four governments in order to be able to detect these people and to now provide the solution that they require to start again. All the criteria have to do with, I mean, their economic situation, their age, the fact that they have no accommodation, the fact that they are totally dependent on solutions provided in these circumstances, health problems. I mean, it has to do with vulnerability. As I would say today, there is a common understanding about what it really represents.
Well, will the people included in the program be given a choice to choose between returning their homes or to stay in the place where they live now?
That for us is a crucial aspect. Freedom of choice is something that should be respected in all circumstances. People can go back, but if they want to go back, not if they are forced to go back. And there are two ways to force people to go back. One is just to do it physically. The other is to make sure that there are no available conditions in their countries of present residence in order to...
That's true.
To make the... it's really a false choice. No, we want them to have a real choice, the possibility to have a housing solution where they live now, if they want to stay where they live now, or the possibility to have a solution in their countries of origin, if that's what they want, to go back to the communities where they were when the war started.
But the housing issue is not the only problem refugees, and you mentioned that refugees and displaced face in the Balkan region. What about schools, infrastructure, medical help? What about jobs? How much of that regional housing program will cover?
As I said, it's important that this is not only a housing program, that this becomes a pillar of a comprehensive set of durable solutions. And that, of course, requires the engagement of the governments and the cooperation of the international community in order to be able to meet exactly the requirements that you mentioned. It's not just to build a house, it's to promote the integration of people, either where they now live, in order to be able to have a normal life, or in their country of origin. And this requires a lot of efforts in all the areas that you mentioned, because obviously house is not enough. But it's a very expensive part of it, and that is why it is so important to have this program and to appeal for the solidarity of the international community. That solidarity now is absolutely essential to make this program a success, because if that solidarity fails, the frustration in these people will be enormous, and I think we need to avoid this at all costs.
Well, you mentioned solidarity. This program includes Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Montenegro, Serbia, but this project is not covering Kosovo. Why?
Well, we are dealing with displacement crisis of the 90s, because in relation to that crisis, we have now the capacity to find a political solution in which the four governments can come together and work together and have a common view on what needs to be done. Unfortunately, the Kosovo crisis is not yet at this stage. There is not yet a political solution related to that. And obviously, we need to work to support, to protect, to assist the people that are displaced. We need to try to find solutions whenever they are possible, but we are not yet in a situation in which the same kind of political consensus is possible to have I would say, a closing chapter in that tragedy. Unfortunately, 2/3 of the world refugees live in a protracted situation. And there is no humanitarian solution for protracted refugee situations. The solution is always political. And that requires political will and leadership. And those are scarce commodities in today's world.
Yeah. Donors are asked to contribute more than 500 million euros. Well, who are the donors? Where will the money come from?
Well, the donors are the countries of the developed world, the European Union, the United States, and many other countries that have already shown their interest and their commitment to participate in this program. And it's also necessary to say that the countries themselves will make their effort. 83 million are supposed to be funded by the four countries based on their budgetary resources, on whatever other resources they will be able to get in access to the financial market. So I think it's important to say that there is a strong commitment of these four countries. They are not rich countries. And this commitment needs to be matched by the international community.
But have you discussed funds with partner countries? Do they have money? We are again talking about millions here. From which funds this part of the agreement will be financed? Do you know?
You mean the four
partner countries, yeah?
They have already invested a lot in relation to the solution of people that were displaced in the conflict. This is not the beginning. This is the final chapter. As I said, more than 1 million people returned, and they had to be supported. So, indeed, there has been a lot of effort. Some of the ministers have quoted the very important expenditure that was already made by these countries in trying to address the displacement crisis. crisis. But of course, we know that we live in a difficult economic situation globally and in Europe. And we hope that these countries will be able to mobilize their own budgetary resources, but that they will also have access to forms of funding from international institutions that will help them cope with this challenge.
The biggest portion of funds is foreseen for Serbia, 57%.
It's where the biggest number of people is.
Then Croatia, 21%. Bosnia and Herzegovina, 17%. And I wanted to ask you, what was the basis for such distribution of funds?
This was agreed by the countries. I mean, this project is owned by the countries. That's why we believe in the success of the program. I mean, the international community cannot come to a region and decide things. It doesn't work. You need to have the ownership by the countries themselves. And what is remarkable is that these 4 countries that have an history that is so complicated with so many conflicts in the past were able to come together and agree on the people that would need to be supported in each one of them, on the amounts that would be required for each one of them, and there is no polemic dimension on this. The 4 countries were able to reach a political compromise on these issues. And this, I think, is a very important signal for the future. Of course, this is related to displacement, but there are many other problems in this region that will require the same level of political will, the same level of leadership, and I hope this will be the symbol of new times for the Western Balkans.
But, Mr. High Commissioner, is this a fair and good plan between countries?
Well, I mean, this is the plan that was agreed by the 4 countries and has the support of the international community. Will it be perfect? Probably not. We have done our best in order to make sure that the needs of people were taken into account. That was our role. I mean, we have no political motivation or political objective. Our role is just that the people that is in need is effectively supported. So that was our contribution. And I must say that the countries took very seriously our advice. So I believe, nothing is perfect in the world, but I believe that this effort really has shown a very objective approach in trying to detect what the real needs are and how the real needs can be matched.
Okay. Well, we are talking about big money here. Who will control implementation? Who will monitor that? Who will control cash flow and how?
Well, the fund that will manage this program is under the leadership, the management of an institution that is a very solid and very respected one, the Council of Europe Development Bank. And so we believe that that is a strong guarantee that the program will be implemented in full respect of what are the rules of solid financial management, and that the contracts, the programs will be done properly. There is another dimension which is more linked to our own activities, to make sure that the people that will get those houses or that will get those forms of support are really the people that was detected to be in need. And we will be cooperating with the 4 governments in order to help create the conditions to make sure that, in fact, that will happen. And so I'm quite optimistic. We also have the OSCE that will support us in this. They have, for instance, here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the biggest presence of international actors on the ground. And we are very optimistic, with the European Union committed, with several other international governments also committed, but especially with the 4 governments' enthusiasm about this project. We are quite optimistic that it will work well.
No, I'm glad to hear that.
Well, you know, there are so many problems in today's world. I mean, we have so many bad news. I mean, Syria, we had Libya, we have now Sudan, we have Mali, we had the Horn of Africa, the tragic situation. We need good news, and we need to cherish those that are providing solutions, because there are so many creating problems. Let's cherish those that are providing solutions.
Well, can this program be a role model for worldwide?
Well, it can, in the sense that in all situations there are disagreements, in all situations there are shadows of the past, phantoms of the past. Whenever you have a fact and in a conflict, and you have 2 protagonists of that conflict, the same fact is seen very differently. If you listen to the story told by the 2 protagonists, the story is completely different. And it is like that in life. It's not easy to bring people together. And here they came together. So indeed, I want this to be a model. I want this to be an example that others will follow, because we badly need solutions. As I told you, 2/3 of the world's refugees have been refugees for more than 5 years. We need the same political will and the same leadership in other parts of the world.
Well, what is the time frame for implementation of this program, regional housing program?
This will now be done in the next 5 years. It will require a meaningful amount of investment, but it will require a lot of physical work, and then it will require a lot of social work in support of the people that will benefit from it. So I think 5 years is a reasonable amount of time for that.
Well, who will ultimately be the owner of such properties in the end?
But it depends. There are very different situations from country to country, and I would say from case to case. In some situations, the owners will be the people themselves, with a condition that will necessarily be defined that they will not be able to sell immediately. I mean, we need to guarantee that this is not a business. This is really to address the needs of families. But in some situations, people are already living in houses that need repairs, restoration, and of course, the property situation of those houses will remain the same. We will have situations in which the houses will be built in the context of programs of social housing, and so the property will be probably of the municipalities or other local or even central authorities of the country, according to the housing programs of each country. But these people will have the right to be there with a very good contract. And in some situations, you might have people that will not go into a house. I mean, you have elderly people that is alone, that will need very specific kinds of care, and that probably will require adequate institutions. So again, the program needs to be flexible in order to address the needs, the different needs of different people, and also the different legal regimes that exist in the 4 countries.
Well, many of the people who are still refugees after all these years lost faith their status will be ever solved. I have talked to such people, and they are skeptical, you know. They really don't believe in implementation. Well, do they have a reason to be skeptical, or what can you promise them?
I mean, if you have been a refugee for, let's say, 20 years or 17 years since '95, I mean, it's perfectly natural that you are skeptical. I mean, if you have waited 17 years for a solution, you want to see the solution before you believe in it. That is perfectly normal. Our responsibility is to do everything to prove them wrong and to prove that they have reasons to be optimistic. And for that, the solutions need to be provided.
Well, UNHCR appealed for help with Syrian refugees, but the funds have not been exactly falling in, according to your report. It appears the international community is showing more interest in the issue of refugees in this region, 17 years after the war ended, than the issue of refugees in Syria at this moment. How is that possible?
I think that things are changing. The most recent information shows that there is a growing commitment of the international community to support Syrian refugees, and the Syrian people deserves support. Syrians have been extremely generous. Syrians have hosted Palestinian refugees for decades, since '48, 500,000 Palestinian refugees, granting them the best set of rights that Palestinians enjoy in any of the countries of the region. Syrians have had more than 1 million Iraqi refugees, and still UNHCR is in Syria supporting Iraqi refugees. So I think now it's also time for the international community to show to the Syrian people that are in difficult circumstances the same solidarity. But I do see movement in Syria. But to be honest, what I'm more afraid is not the Syrian situation, is situations in Africa, like Mali, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, or like the Horn of Africa. If if one looks at the totality of our programs around the world, Africa is indeed the area where we have more forgotten crises, where sometimes people never heard about. I mean, the Central African Republic. It's a country never mentioned. Never mentioned. You have been there, so you know what I'm talking about. It's never mentioned. I've seen a program about in Al Jazeera, in one of your other channels, about Central African Republic. It's the only one I've seen.
Yeah.
Anytime, anywhere. But you have seen it. You have people displaced, you have refugees from the DRC, you have refugees of Central African Republic in Chad, in Cameroon. This is completely forgotten. So indeed, when crises are not focused in the global media, when crises are absent in the discussion of public opinions, then it's much more difficult to fund them. So indeed, I'm hopeful that Syrian refugees will have support. We count on the international community for that. But it's not only Syria. I mean, look at Sudan, look at Mali. So many crises, new crises, and so many old ones that remain. The Horn of Africa, DRC, Central African Republic, Côte d'Ivoire. Indeed, it is necessary for the world to understand that supporting refugees and displaced people, helping them to find solutions for their plight, is not only a matter of solidarity, it's also a matter of enlightened self-interest. Because if those crises are not stabilized, if those crises are not solved, and addressing displacement is a way to help solve this crisis, I believe that global peace and security will be more and more at risk.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you, as a former Prime Minister of Portugal, what is your assessment of economic and political situation in Europe?
I think that Europe is facing a very difficult moment. In my present capacity, I cannot be active in politics as I was in my past ones. But I think Europe is facing an enormous economic challenge, and especially a challenge of political leadership and political unity. The capacity to really address the enormous problems that are being faced in a united way with a strong solidarity.
And how this affects your current work?
Well, I would say that, first of all, it affects the life of Europeans themselves. When we see levels of unemployment like the ones we have in my own country, or I've just been in Spain last week with more than 50% of young people unemployed, this is something that, of course, is very dramatic for the societies. It's a threat for the cohesion and stability of societies. But obviously, many countries are also facing huge budgetary problems, and because of that, their budgets for development cooperation or humanitarian action are also impacted. And indeed, we are facing, as UNHCR in 2012, more needs from the field, more people in need of support, and less financial resources than last year to cope with those challenges.
But you are still optimistic.
We have to stay determined. Jean Monnet was one of the fathers of Europe, of the European Union. At the time, the European community used to say that he was not optimistic nor pessimistic. He was determined. I think that's what we all need to be. Determined to face the problems and determined to find solutions for them.
Mr. High Commissioner, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.
We ask the question, what is needed in the world?